same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today, many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. In exile in his own land. In his own land.
I've been hungry all my life. Yeah. Starved to the bone.
So a lot of people, if you look into the finances, they speak on the great wealth gap between blacks and whites. Why aren't they on the same playing field? Now the racists would say, well, black people are just lazy. The racists would say black people, all they want is handouts. They don't want to do for themselves. Black people whine and black people just want to be given everything. This is what the racists have to say. And in order for you to understand the argument I'm going to use based on history and based on facts that really even the racists can't dispute, they are the last ones that need to be speaking to black people about anything. Because if anybody got more given to them, more handouts given to them, would be their group. Nobody else has gotten that much before. We're going to travel back in time. And it will also explain to you what is really white privilege they mention. Because see, a lot of people mention white privilege, but you're not articulating it very well based upon history and fact. So we're going to try to do this in this video. We're going to cover 3 things that the U.S. government has done to give white Americans an advantage over black people or anyone else. If you travel back in time, you will figure this thing out. Now, the first program that they had to give white Americans an advantage, it was called the Headright System. Now, back in Virginia, 1618, they came up with the Headright System. Now, this system was to give 50 acres of land to every person that's head of the household. And they will usually give them between 50 to 100, but they can give them up to 1,000 acres of land. Now, we know this land was Indian territory. How did they get all this land from the Indians? Well, we know that the Indians didn't have firearms and cannons and all this other stuff. So they slaughtered the Indians and took their land, bottom line, because all this stuff was Native American territory. So if they wanted more people over here, that came up with this system and said, listen, if you pay for your voyage to come over here from Europe, we will give you 100 acres of land. You get your 100 acres of land, you could build your farms, you could build your plantations and all this other stuff. And so people got money together and came over here. They got the free land for free, given by the government, completely for free. And they settled here. Now, wealthy people that was already over here, if they brought in servants, indentured servants, and slaves, they would get 50 acres per indentured servant or slaves. That's why they packed those boats so tight on having Africans on top of each other. It's because every African that came over here was 50 acres of land. You know, you get that? So it was a whole lot of money being made on top of the slaves getting here and doing the jobs for free that they did not pay for. Now, you remember when they would say that, well, white people were slaves too? Well, that is more so the Irish that was indentured servants. And those in that time period that came over, a lot of them had came over even with some of the Africans. They had to come work for 5 to 7 years. But they wasn't a slave. Don't get me wrong, they wasn't. But they had to work they dead off. And after the 5 to 7 years, those indentured servants, Irish, a lot of them, was given land closer to Indian territory, like way away from all the white settlers. This is what happened to them. But they still got land after they worked their dead off. But the black man and black woman got nothing but misery, pain, and horror. And of course, this stuff was legal at that time period. Now let's bring us to the second thing that got white Americans ahead, the Homestead Act of 1862. The Homestead Act was given by the U.S. government. You could make application. They had all this land to just give people, and they gave them land, literally. Black people didn't get this land at all. And if a black person possibly was given a land, it's probably one of the ones who were part of, you know, even from slavery times, so you had the black boule, you know, the blacks who are the tokens within their society, and they trust and they like and they use as a buffer to get a hold to us. But they got ahead by getting all that land. So you had two systems so far that's given nothing but land, and the African didn't get anything at all. In the same year in 1862, when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he signed it and freed the slaves. But there were 930 slave owners petitioned the U.S. government for a reparation for those slaves. And the U.S. government gave 930 slave owners the amount of money of $300 at that time period per slave. And the U.S. government paid for close to 3,000 slaves. Now, for every slave, $300 equivalent to our money now is close to $7,200 if you do the inflation calculator. So that's a lot of money that they gave out to them at that time period for losing their slaves. But the black man and black woman didn't get anything. No kind of reparation, no kind of land, nothing. Nothing but death, misery, and pain. Then you come to the most recent thing that happened back in the 1930s all the way up to the late 60s. The redlining program by the FHA and the VA loans, which black people in the military could not get these VA loans. Now, the banks at one point in time weren't lending to nobody, so the FHA, the federal government, came in and said, listen, we'll back this up with our money. So they started giving loans, low interest loans for white people only to get homes because they wanted to create the white middle class. But these white people could not move in certain areas. And so what the banks would do, they would look at the whole city. They'll look at, what they deem as the good areas by color. The blue is the best area. Yellow is kind of declining. They still have some value. And red is the bad areas. And most of these red, they call it red lining on the map. They would say, okay, this is where the blacks at. This is a bad area. This is deteriorating. We don't want you nowhere near them. So you're going to move over here to the blue area. And that's where the whites was moving to. Now, no black people had a chance to move to those blue areas. See, the government even created the ghettos, the slums, because no black family could get those loans at all. They had to stay in those deplorable conditions. They had to stay in neighborhoods that was not good, while the white families was given plenty advantage to move to good areas. Like I said, all the way up to the late 60s. So you look at in history, you've been given land upon land. Slave masters were given reparations, and white families was given homes, very, very low interest when the banks weren't loaning to anybody at all. Then you take a group of people who never was given land, who never had a Homestead Act, who never had a redlining program or even be able to participate in the VA loan program to get homes. And then after that, you want to say to those people who never got into that, they always want a handout. When history shows that who got the most handouts? These people are whining. These people don't work hard. What have you worked hard to do, Mr. or Miss Racist? What have you done? You've given everything in this country. You build everything off of slave labor. Even companies to the existence to this day, at least about 240 companies still to this day, had their ties back to slavery. There's what? Millions of people still in this country that's tied to their old slave money. And then if black people say something about reparations, it's a problem. It's not right. It's divisive. It's not fair. Well, it wasn't fair when you was getting all the land, millions of acres of land. It wasn't fair then either, but that's okay. So when you see these things about wealth gaps and things like that, understand it comes from somewhere. Now, I know what some gonna say. I had nothing to do with slavery. I had nothing to do with any of that. Why y'all talking about that? Because everything in this country that's happening today has a lineage to something. So when you say certain things, understand you was given a shot. We wasn't given a shot like that. What? Oh, well, you guys aren't slaves anymore. Oh, okay. Really? We still mental slaves. We still oppressed in a lot of ways. Well, you guys, you're not in the civil rights movement time. No, we're not. But really, has anything changed? Police still killing us. Black people still getting lynched, but they're lying and saying it's suicides. Black people unemployment is high, no different than back, those periods, at least when they had segregation, blacks had more jobs because they had to create their own businesses. Okay. But outside of all that, those excuses, everybody else got reparations. They just gave the Holocaust survivors more money as of recent, President Obama. The Japanese people got money for being in internment camps. They gave them $20,000 each family. Okay, and they didn't go through slavery. It was just internment camps, right? Native Americans was given, I heard a recent lawsuit of $534 million, which they should get that because look what happened to them. But when the black man and black woman talk about reparations, oh, no. Well, you've been getting reparations ever since you got here, but we can't have anything. And that's the thing. We have to keep researching history to understand the difference. If you really want to bring people together, if you want to stop dividing, well, you know what? You have to make right the wrongs of the past. The wise thing to do is make it right. Do like you done to the Native American and the Japanese and even the Holocaust survivors. Give what you owe, because really it's what you owe. It's all that free labor. It was free. You didn't pay anything. All the murders, all the things that happened to black people. We have been terrorized more than any group of people. You talk about ISIS. ISIS is nothing compared to slave master. ISIS is nothing compared to even some of these police. What are you talking about? I mean, we've been through so much in this country, and we have to know these things in order for us to learn and grow of ourselves. If we stay in the dark, because, they're not going to teach these things in school. They're not going to tell you about the Head Right program. They're not going to tell you about the Homestead Act of 1862. They're not going to tell you about the redlining and VA loan program where blacks can get none of that at all. It was exclusively a racist program. They're not going to tell you that because they would have to tell people that, you know what, we were given an advantage because of the color of our skin, period. And you wasn't because you were black and a piece of crap. They basically would have to say that, but they're not going to say that. And this, what I'm talking about today, you can all go research it yourself. This is about not only educating black people, it's about educating all people to understand why certain things in this country the way it is. So when black people bring up the term white privilege, that's what they're talking about. You were privileged to get everything. You're privileged to be set up in certain areas. Even you're privileged with the benefit of the doubt. You're privileged when you kids do wrong that they can be an individual. But when our kids do wrong, they represent the whole race. Oh, that's how black people are. That's typical of them. But if a white person do it, well, that's just them. That's not all of us. We don't be like that. And if a person do the same thing and make a blanketed statement, then that's so wrong. So it's just things that we have to research and look into. And this is something for you just to be educated on. Because if you really want to, like you say, come together, if you really want to be one people, well, you got to make what's wrong right in order to do that. And if you don't want to make what's wrong right, then it lets you know that you're just an evil person who don't really want to do the right thing. You like the way it is. You like one group being above the other, and you like the advantage of that. And that's fine. You could do that. And I get it. It really doesn't bother me. I've accepted in this country, there are people who really like the society to benefit one group and not benefit all. I understand that. I am a realist. But what I'm doing is just trying to educate you on what got people in that position. That's all. That way, when these people talk to you again and say something about what you don't do and what you want and handouts, you can say, you know what? Let's talk about all the handouts you got. We'll talk about that. Because really, who's the recipient, biggest recipient of affirmative action? It's not black people. Actually, white women are the biggest recipients of affirmative action. But they don't like to even talk about that, because they would be calling what? Actually researching something for yourself? But that's something we don't do. We just listen to Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity, and just whatever they say, we go with it as gospel and not doing anything at all to look into things. So, guys, just make sure you look into these programs, research it, teach it to your children, let them know the true history of this nation and what the U.S. government has done to give advantage to one group and not the other. So we can understand why we still have some issues to this day, and we possibly, hopefully one day can fix these issues, but I don't know. Hit me up in the comments, shoot the commentaries, subscribe.
100 years ago, in 1866, the Reverend Allen Wright, a Choctaw Indian, gave this state its name, Oklahoma.
Short, Colin Powell, haircut having ass motherfucker. Little Angela Davis, mustache wearing ass motherfucker.
Two Choctaw words meaning red people. Later, when Oklahoma became the 46th state to enter the Union, not only its name, but its official flag recognized the Indians' historic influence. The shield, the feathers, a peace pipe, and an olive branch. But in 1866, both peace pipe and olive branch were being ignored, for the West had not yet been won. The great Indian wars of the plains were just beginning, and would in large measure be the destructive last stand of a subjugated people. In those years, however, 5 tribes of Indians always stood apart, not because of their valiant wars, but because of their peaceful ways and civilized conduct. They were the tribes who had come to Oklahoma against their will, and who were to lay the foundations for this state's future. Of these tribes, more than any others perhaps, can it be said, their history is ours, their history is ours, their history is ours, theirs our heritage. Affected were 5 tribes of advanced Indians, including, besides the Choctaws, the Cherokees, the Creeks, the Chickasaws, and the Seminoles. Because of white settlement and political pressures, which had been building since the American Revolution, they were ordered to leave their homes of centuries in the states of the Southeast and on to new lands, largely undisturbed and only partially explored. These new lands stretch from the Red River in the south to the Illinois River in the north, from the Arkansas border in the east to the Great Plains in the west. For almost 100 years, this vast area would enrich history and create legends as Indian territory, and would be occupied by a distinguished people that the Congress would name in 1876 and would be occupied by a distinguished people that the Congress would name in 1876, in an act of supreme tribute, the 5 civilized tribes.
Mama, I love you. P.O.P. all the time.
Early in the 1830s, the administration of Andrew Jackson commanded 5 tribes of Indians in the southeastern United States: Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi, North and South Carolina, Alabama, and Florida, to move further west, away from white settlements. In a series of executive orders, acts of Congress, and forced treaties, the Indians were guaranteed new lands in exchange for the old, which were to be open to settlement with or without Indian permission. With or without Indian permission. With or without Indian permission. Their improved fertile lands were eagerly sought, and Jacksonian democracy, not indifferent to backwoods politics, made Indian removal an aggressive, basic policy. Only a very few were willing to go. The others petitioned the President and the Congress for relief. Some minor consideration was given, mainly because these 5 particular tribes seemed to be so different from other Indians, so surprisingly well educated in the usages of organized society. In fact, their dress was a likeness of the white man's, contrasting sharply to the traditional Indians. For example, Sequoyah, the legendary Cherokee, had only passing respect for color, as seen in his famous turban, but otherwise looked as if he could have served in Jackson's cabinet.
Oh, hell no! Is Wayne Brady gonna have to choke a bitch?
His name was George Guess, but in Cherokee, Sequoyah and his legacy is all around us. It was he that devised by himself a system for his people to read and write. But an even more revealing portrait of the age is that of John Ross, who led the Cherokees for more than 40 years.
You pee on me.
In every way, the man of style and charm in 1832. Ross and Sequoyah demonstrate forcibly the widespread intermarriage between the 5 tribes and white missionaries and early European pioneers. The widespread intermarriage between the 5 tribes and white missionaries and early European pioneers. The widespread intermarriage between the 5 tribes and white missionaries and early European pioneers. Between the 5 tribes and white missionaries and early European pioneers. It was this fact that accounted for their adoption of the white man's manner, from living in some instances on plantations to owning Negro slaves, from sending their children to school and church to having constitutional self-government. Yet in the end, neither Jackson nor the Congress would yield. within these boundaries, confined on the east by Arkansas, on the north by Kansas, the south by Texas, and the west by other scattered nomadic tribes, the so-called wild Indians. These were years of Indian uncertainty and confusion. Still, they struggled on. By 1860, the 5 tribes had been in Oklahoma for about 30 years. Then, suddenly, the Civil War.
T! Sweet T! Come get that nigga, Sweet! Come get that nigga, Sweet! Hey, come get that nigga! Sit that nigga! Damn! Holy...
In the beginning, the tribes had argued among themselves on 3 possible choices: the Union, the South, neutrality. But arguments became quarrels, and quarrels became armed rebellion. Some Indians joined the Confederacy, others the Union armies. Still others joined neither. Ignoring for the most part the counsel of their leaders, who were almost as confused about allegiance as were the individual tribe members, the best men of each tribe went off to war, but in all directions. In the end, they were all considered rebels, even though the Creeks and Cherokees sent more men to the north than south. But the leaders had signed treaties with the Confederacy, some reluctantly, some gladly. There is a common historical point of view that geography, not sympathy, drew the tribes to the Southern cause, in spite of the fact that some wealthy Indians managed huge plantations with Negro slaves. But they were not representative. What was more pertinent, more persuasive in the final decision, was the geographic reality that Indian territory was adjacent on the east and south to Confederate states. Their own safety, therefore, in jeopardy, they committed themselves legally to the South. They would long regret it.
Each also took sides against America during the Revolution. Each was forcibly removed to Indian territory west of Arkansas by the United States government, and the leaders of each of the 5 civilized tribes were Masons. And the leaders of each of the 5 civilized tribes were Masons. We have at least one bit of evidence that the integration of the Indian with Freemasonry was cultivated in a kind of ambassador relationship. It is possible that a Maryland-born English loyalist named William Augustus Bowles brought Masonry to the leaders of the tribes. He was properly positioned to do so. On a sojourn to Florida, Bowles joined up with a party of Creek Indians. He was appointed to lead the civilized tribes in the war against the colonies. He married a Creek woman and eventually became totally integrated into the Creek tribal culture. In addition to being the military or war chief of the tribes, he was appointed provincial grand master of the Creek, Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw Indians by the Grand Lodge of England. It was not widely known at the time that the Creek nation had 6 treaties of alliance between the King of England and their nation.
Oh, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck, 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 fuck,
As their military leader, Bowles called all of his tribes together in the Bahamas to meet with the provincial governor. The war didn't take place, but Bowles took a delegation of tribal leaders to England the following year, and during that visit he was made a member of Prince of Wales Lodge number 229. The lodge was instituted to consist only of those who were honored with appointment under King George. In the lodge minutes where Bowles was asked to join, he was introduced as the chief of the Creek Nation, and the record clearly shows the lodge's interest in introducing Masonry to the Indians so that the cause of humanity and brotherly love may go hand in hand. Bowles was ultimately captured by the Spanish and died in a Spanish-owned prison in Cuba in 1805, not long after the Cherokees had settled on lands in Arkansas.
Shit, son.
Interestingly, if not coincidentally, another Mason with the Bowles name, this one known as Captain Bowles, served as the chief of the Western Cherokees from 1705 to 1813. He would later figure prominently in Texas Masonry as well as in Arkansas. The bottom line is that regardless of where or when Masonry entered into the Indian culture of men, we know many of the early tribal leaders who impacted Masonry in Indian territory were Masons before they came to the territory, before they came to the territory, before they came to the territory. And we can speculate that Masonry was a part of at least some of the tribal cultures before the start of the 1800s. Matthew Leeper was a charter member of Washington Lodge, Arkansas in 1837. He was a close friend of Brother Andrew Jackson, who had been the principal architect in the removal of the tribes to Indian Territory. Leeper was a prominent civic leader who ultimately became a United States Indian agent in 1857. Territorial historian Charles Krager said of Leeper that he was one of the Masonic pioneers who carried the spirit of Masonry to the Indians of the 5 tribes. And we certainly have a rich legacy of Native American involvement in the affairs of city and state and in Freemasonry. No other area in North America can point to the successful integration of the Indian into the body politic as has been accomplished in Oklahoma. And Freemasonry played an important role in the blending of the cultures. No other place did the Indian knock at the door of Freemasonry in such large numbers.
Hey, you're fucking with the wrong son, nigga, okay?
Dude, I will hang your old ass by your turban.
Oh, turban now. Do you see any fucking turban here?
So, over the last 2 semesters, most of my lectures have focused on the experience of Native American loss of homeland and victimization by the U.S. government. But this week, I'd like to balance it out by focusing a little bit on some of the less pleasant aspects of Native American heritage and a very controversial issue in reservation politics today. And that's the history of Native American involvement in slavery, not only of other Native American tribes, but of African Americans as well. Today, we'll be watching a documentary on the Black Indian.
Mind your damn motherfucking business, bitch! Little stupid bitch!
Which is an obscure but very important topic in Native American history.
Oh, I'm hurt! Oh, my neck! My back! My neck and my back! Oh, I want 150,000!
It's a source of ongoing controversy because recently, the Cherokee and other slave-owning tribes of the past recently decided to strip black people of citizenship. That's the descendant of slaves of Cherokee Nation, Choctaw Nation, Seminole Nation. They no longer have citizenship.
Give me my damn money back right now, and I don't have no damn receipt.
Well, where's the cover to...
I don't have no damn cover. I kiss my eyes, so what?
It's an important issue because critics accuse the Native Americans of racism. But for the Native Americans, it comes down to an issue of tribal sovereignty. The same thing they've been fighting for 200 plus years. Is that we have an inalienable right to have our own policies on our own sovereign nations.
Shut up, bitch!
But to start, I think it's important not to reduce slavery to stereotypes. We tend to, almost by default, think that slavery is a white institution of capturing black people.
Fuck you!
But in truth, history shows us that slavery is a basic economic system of every society in history, bar none. It's a basic way of organizing labor. And we have to consider that before Europeans, Arabs, blacks, and Turks had massive slave networks in Africa where they bought African people from African tribes.
Fuck you lying. Why you always lying?
So, my point in saying so is simply acknowledging Native American participation in slavery doesn't isolate them as any guilty party. But still, we can't accept stereotypes. We can't accept the stereotype of Native Americans running around in loincloths and scalping people and taking slaves. But at the same time, we can't just accept the stereotype that Native Americans were docile and peaceful and one with nature and promoting human equality. In truth, Native Americans had the same economic needs as any other society. They had the same basic human functions of warfare.
Cabazon suffered from extreme poverty, and due to neglected treaties, they were left with little land. As the California lottery became popular in the early 1980s, the Cabazon started to raise revenue by operating bingo games and poker halls. City and county authorities tried to shut down gambling operations, but the Cabazon tribe sued and won in federal court. The Supreme Court reviewed this case, and it led to Congress passing the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. This act gave tribal sovereignty to create casinos, and that states and tribes should create tribal-state compacts. This means that gaming tribes' revenues are not taxed, and that states do not have access to the financial records, but that states can occasionally confiscate revenue, which serves as a special tax on Indian reservations. However, the act also stated that the federal government has the ultimate power to regulate Indian gaming.
For years, there was no money in Indian country. There finally is. Indian gaming generates $30 billion a year in revenue. That's an enormous amount. There's only 2 million Indians in America. And the tribes together generate almost $30 billion a year. The black members of those tribes have been generally excluded from those benefits. I think they deserve to share them. It's their history.
Cherokee Nation gets a lot of flack for being a thin blood tribe. I don't know if you've heard that term, but a lot of Cherokees do appear white or indistinguishable from Europeans. So it does appear that it's a mostly white group, excluding black people.
Last month, I had the honor to meet President Obama at a Native American roundtable. And one of the tribal leaders goes, Mr. President, the next time you get the opportunity to nominate a Supreme Court justice, we would want Native Americans to be at the table in the vetting process to make sure that that individual understands and knows Indian issues. And he said that, he said, by all means, he will do that. And so I leaned over and said, well, Mr. President, I would want to say that, the next time you get to nominate a Supreme Court nominee, that it be a Native American. And he leans over to me and said, hey, man, I just met you. I can't nominate you Supreme Court. And everybody just busted up laughing. It was great. But, yeah, that was really a highlight. I don't know how long I'll have this job, but that will be one of the highlights. Yeah. The Cherokee Nation has many faces. Chief John Ross, the most famous Cherokee patriot and greatest principal chief this tribe has ever known. This is my great-great-great-grandfather, something that I'm very proud of. He was 1/8 Cherokee. I'm 1/8, the same blood quantum that Chief John Ross was. I'm not an identifiable Indian. I could go down walk down the street, no one's going to say, oh, well, there goes a Cherokee.
You're advocating for criminal activity, Quanell. These people are not here lawfully. They need to do what our ancestors did, what many Mexicans have done.
Well, no, wait a minute.
Many, don't interrupt
me.
Your
ancestors came here illegally. Wasn't nothing legal about your ancestors.
Listen.
They came illegally and they murdered, they raped, they pillaged a whole race of people. This country, Texas, Arizona, and California belongs to the Mexicans.
Quanell, get back
it was
to the
stole from them.
You
so
tell
when
me
you
to get back to the
ancestors,
point.
They came here illegally.
No, you're not being fair to me here. You say stay on topic. I say, okay, we'll stay on topic. And then as soon as we start talking about illegal immigration,
your ancestors.
You go back to the black issue. Let's stay on topic.
Your ancestors are the master illegal immigrants.
Give me the opportunity to respond in that, you know what? We're all Americans here. And if you are here legally, absolutely, then we need to come together and we need to pass good laws for enforcing the laws.
Well, perhaps the Native Americans should have passed laws against your ancestors.